Let me tell you a little bit about history. All right. So this is going to focus around an outdated style that might make some sense to Joe Biden and his people that he pulled over from Obama's intelligence world, okay? So let me go through history here. So after the failures of the CIA in the 1970s, George Bush took over the CIA and essentially instituted a CIA style called negative KGB. His advanced geniusness had him with his concise genius theoretics of destroying the Berlin Wall by essentially building a complete diametric KGB. So that essentially didn't work. And so then in the 1980s, essentially that had the same person instituting a complete negative Nazi style agency. Then that essentially is what got theoreticized as what brought down the Berlin Wall. So then the greatness of Ronnie Reagan and Georgie Bush and shit. But in the end, all it did was essentially filter in a bunch of Nazis. This method essentially filtered in a bunch of KGB agents everywhere throughout our government, and that then in the 1980s, it essentially filtered in a bunch of Nazi style agents throughout our government, and that then essentially that got squashed. Then George Bush's the advanced genius skull brain had essentially instituted before the Clintons took over a new version of CIA. And so what came of that was essentially a Chinese KGB, a negative version of that. That essentially didn't stymie any kind of rise to intelligence power, in that China was able to essentially, they were able to infiltrate with a whole bunch of people that were essentially Americans that essentially were Chinese double agents. These were Americans that were basically KGB double agents. These were in the 80s Americans that were basically Nazi double agents that were working for the other side. So, since that failed and basically built a Chinese KGB infiltration into the CIA basically with a whole bunch of double agents, then a whole theoretical geniusness was then reinstituted with George Bush Jr., which is like, this one doesn't work, this one doesn't work, this one doesn't work. Let's do negative Islamic terror. And I found that essentially, basically, people that are silently blackmailed were infiltrated inside of most of the CIA in the form of blackmail control, but not necessarily active in these ways. So then Obama came in, and basically these people from the past were like damn near the only people that knew anything about this stuff. So the advanced geniusness was to essentially place in the 2010s was to essentially have what Don Trump kind of does, which is to have basically Russian intelligence control and also secretly Nazi intelligence control over the decisions of the CIA. And so now that era pretty much has failed, now what they'll be pushing for is essentially what is a Chinese KGB and an Islamic terror intelligence, basically controlling the actions of the CIA through blackmailing. And so currently, this should say 2020. Sorry, that's an error in here. But that this is essentially what the Republicans will view as the path forward in all of this. To have essentially Chinese intelligence and essentially what they'll have some Carlyle group theoretic about it. And that the whole idea is that there's two worlds to Aramco. There's this skull banging George Bush shit. And then there's the Sod's world, but that's integrated into that company. And so the whole idea is that the Sod's been trying to filter out these fucking people through anything in his country that includes his oil company, okay? And so with that, essentially what that will be like is it'll essentially be like a Nixon idea with like a Donald Rumsfeld idea of how to do executive control or something over the CIA. And so currently we're like in this phase right here, okay, of essentially what is satanic theoretics on how to run the MK Ultra ideas. And so the whole idea is that they put a lot of time and effort into that MK Ultra, and it was so embedded for so many decades into the CIA's methodology that it gets maintained because essentially it's so ingrained into the ways that they do things that it becomes very difficult for people that do a lot of the leadership kind of stuff to be controlling. So the whole idea is that what this means, in ways this represents MK Ultra, in ways. And so the theoretical ideas that are used are similar and basically the same as during the theoretical ideas of the MK Ultra era. So where does MK Ultra stem from? World War II and OSS. That is built on SMART. All right? That is built on SMART. The whole idea is that the only way to run a CIA is to literally be building it in a smart, Platonian smart way. It's the only way. Let me tell you what that means. So, this is art, this is religion, and this is Platonian world. CIA essentially operates. This is considered military intelligence. This is considered executive intelligence, and this is considered central intelligence. This is Platonian smart box. And its function stems all the way back from the people that handed the Satanists of the world their ass in the form of allied fuck you we won. That was OSS. It was. It is the only way to effectively run an intelligence in a non-military way. And so, essentially, the function of central intelligence is that the military intelligence, they essentially are supposed to just stick with troop movement type of intelligence stuff. And that these people are supposed to be doing smart and a lot of analysis of the stuff that operates kind of outside of the military in ways. This would be like infiltrations of companies, infiltrations of executive branches, that type of stuff. And that the only way to do that is in essentially what, here's like what it is in Britain. It's like MI5, they're dumb, all right? They're military. And that essentially MI6 is like smart Jewish intelligence style, basically. And so that is the only way they failed. MI1C started in like 1907 or something. They have years of failure before everybody else, right? The whole idea is that from that, this type of stuff, these operate around theoretical ways to do clandestine type of stuff in a military intelligence way. And that there's essentially, it's built out of theoretical stuff that comes from Satanism. In smart, it's stupid to be a fucking Satanist. It is. And so the whole idea is that they're like that in their world. They don't like Satanism. They know that people that start doing this stuff are doing satanic methodologies. MI1C essentially started with a bunch of scruffy dudes or hoity-toity kind of smart people that sat in their gentlemen's clubs doing smart analysis of things that people were doing in World War I. And that is essentially where, when it comes to doing anything in the Allied world, you can't be pulled in by the Axis world's methodologies. You have to do smart, and then it pulls them to smart. And that in a smart world, it's not smart to do these methods. And then they start to learn. And then they start to be smart. And then their agency worlds basically stop doing a bunch of illegal stuff because they finally, when they get pulled into switchy bitching, which is what Axis theoretics are, or satanic theoretics. See, if your CIA structures and starts doing everything in a perfect smart way, that will become effective because all of their psychoping won't necessarily be effective. And so they'll want them not to be like that. So what that means in their whole theoretical fucking theory in the world is to switchy bitch by doing what they do and thus expecting them to switch to doing this stuff. And that the whole idea is that if you just maintain doing smart, eventually it becomes so overwhelming when they attempt to switchy bitch the method, and that it starts to make them more educated. And then they start to realize that all of the problems that they suffer from start to get noticed as internal problems instead of external problems. All of the things that they're doing that they outwardly blame on everybody else, if they start to attempt to switchy bitch the United States or Britain or Allied world, they'll start to have their own internal smart analysis at how their own actions are causing the problems that they're bitching off on their enemy. And over time, they'll start to correct that stuff. And then they'll start to realize that going to war, even in a clandestine Cold War way, with people that do this, essentially these people, it's not smart to do war. It's smart to do peace. And that over time, they'll start to realize that peace and prosperity is what they want in ways. As they get smarter, they'll start to realize the economic aspects and the religious aspects, even in Islamic terror. The more they start to structure their like Taliban or something like that in a smart way, the more they'll start to realize that the problems that they have that has them warring or something, they'll start to realize that it comes directly from them. And that once they start correcting their own problems, what you'll see is they won't necessarily do terrorism after a while. And then what you'll see is that they'll start to structure themselves in a smart way that essentially will have them with what it is that they want, which is a group of people, a populace that all agrees with their specific brand of Islamic church control theocracy, that as long as there being peace and prosperity, there's not really much a smart world can do if the populace in a democracy way supports the theocracy, essentially. And that if you build a peace and prosperity theocracy, like the Saud, then what you'll see is that the smart people of the world will start to build prosperity in your country. That will bring up all of the poor, that will bring up all of the problems economically, and then you will be prosperous. And then people won't be getting blown up, and then you won't have little Islamic, like psycho gangs inside of your country and shit. Because if you make it easy to make money in a righteous way, then the gangs, they go away. Because essentially the gangs arise, just like here in the United States, because there's no economic ladder for them to exist legally in a righteous way. And so this is what smart is. And you see that from all my analysis, all of the skull pedo bang land, it's not smart to blackmail yourself in the enemy's database. It's the dumbest fucking shit ever. This shit. You guys want to know what a skull is? A Satanist. Okay? The Yale Skull Society is a satanic society. And that you know what those people at their core in their brain are like? Satanists. Satanists think backwards at a very core level. You see, having the smartest people that aren't pedo bangers or blackmailed in any way, the Skull Society blackmails people internally. You can't be in it unless you blackmail. Backwards. And that if you start building up whole fucking databases in it, then there's hacker worlds that take everything. You see, that putting the people that can't be influenced by blackmailing, that are the smartest people in the world, in charge of understanding and doing analysis, will have an unbiased, uninfluenced outputs. And then those will be the best, smartest ways to do anything. And that it will be effective in everything that their purposes would want to achieve. It will be. And so, just remember that right now, we're in China Knox, where essentially these people are like blackmailed as like NOCs for China's intelligence agency. And then there's these cops and things and shit that are essentially Islamic terrorists, Knox. And that currently the infrastructure seems to be pushing subversively towards Mormon cop gang. This is deputy gang. This is Mormon's deputy gang method. And see, the stuff that happens on the ground is essentially what affects this stuff a lot. The regional, small regions that have this essentially affect a lot of things that happen up here. This is central one, and that this is many in the field or in counties and shit. And that essentially this method will be seen as being like this type of stuff, and then it'll include Rudy Giuliani, and then this is like the 90s kind of stuff, and that it'll be viewed in that way, but essentially it'll be controlled by North Koreans, Chinese, rogue agents type of stuff. And this will be controlled in ways by Islamic terrorism through their drug realm. And so currently, that falls into the dumb. One smart, many dumb. These are dumb methods and backwards thinking in a satanic cult way. So, the whole idea is that essentially the only things that I ever really studied was the theoretical ideas of MI1C and the OSS. That is smart. And that everything else becomes like a bitch brain variant to smart. Everything they do, breaking laws all the time to prove that you're an agent or something. I mean, that's the kind of shit that comes from this shit. Where they attempt to regionally prove that they're part of some clandestine world based on showing how they can break laws all the fucking time psychotically. That's dumb.